the worse this situation is looking for our colorless player. So Guzma does go down, does have a way to get something back in the active. Sableye. Oh, and Lost City. So, funnily enough, the payoff for the Lost Zone is about to find itself in the Lost Zone. All right, welcome back, everybody. Got another exciting game for you here today. This time it is Lost Zone Psychic versus Colorless. More typical style of Colorless deck today. Kind of got your big old Snorlax, along with a lot of other Pokemon, just to kind of hit hard, go fast, do a lot of damage. Looks like our Psychic player starting with that new Uxie card. I believe that's what that one is called, or that might be misprint. I can't remember which one is which of those three. Well, our Colorless has Swovent. So Colorless player is going first. They put down an Artisan. Gonna go ahead and find a Pokemon. But just to talk about our Psychic player's Pokemon, since that's a newer one, just came out recently in the Surging Sparks set. It, for 1 Psychic Energy, lets you do 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. I actually think it's specifically 2 damage counters, which equates to 20 damage, but it obviously can come into play in certain situations, where effects of attacks are blocked, that effect can be blocked. Such by something like the Unfazed Fat Snorlax, which our colorless player is almost certainly running, which I actually do see that in their hand. It's like some of their cards are kind of turned a little bit upside down here as they're kind of going through their deck. The moment, again, they're just trying to pick up what they want from this Artisan. Seems like they are debating going with that Mincino, potentially. Is ultimately the choice. Does have a nice call for family attack if you're able to do that. Lets you find 2 basic Pokemon and put you down on your bench. But you are really honestly playing it for the ability on the evolved Pokemon. Oh, not sure what was going on there. I guess opponent wasn't sure what quite happened. So attach that Jet Energy to the Mincino, which makes it go into the active, and then pass turn. But like I was saying, you're really running that Mincino for the evolution, that Sensino, which has Make Do, lets you discard 1 card and draw 2 cards. Guessing here, not only did our colorless player want to protect their Squovent, but next turn, based on what's in their hand, they may wind up using that Mincino to use Call for Family to go ahead and help set up their board. They don't have the most amazing hand here. Our Psychic player going ahead and making use of that Artisan as well. One of the dangers of something like Artisan, especially in this format, is everybody's basics don't have a roll box, so everybody can use that and start setting up their boards. But I don't blame our colorless player at all. They really did need to get things going. Pretty much looked like they were more or less just going to pass their turn if they didn't go ahead and play that Artisan. They're basically playing the odds here and hoping that they can get it set up a lot faster than Psychic can. So it looks like Psychic able to get that Dusclops down as well as that Comfey. Comfey will be able to let our Psychic player get their Lost Zone going. This again is a Lost Zone deck, so they're going to be playing lots of spread. Once they can get to 10 in the Lost Zone, they will enable something like that Lost Mine Sableye to be able to spread around 12 damage counters every turn for just 1 energy. Very powerful attacker. Level Ball is going to also allow our Psychic player to set up some additional ones of their Pokemon. Looks like they're debating that little Esper, which can evolve into that Meowscarada. I believe that's the name of that Pokemon. I always seem to forget. But the Meowscarada lets you get a couple supporters back from, or I can't remember if it's from your deck or from your discard pile. I believe it's from your deck, and you put them on either on top or into your hand. Can never quite remember. This is not a deck that I've seen all that often. Either way, it's a very powerful effect, so setting it up early makes a lot of sense. While our Psychic player just has a fantastic hand, going back in with Arven. Gonna find a tool card as well as an item card. Looks like they're debating going for that U-turn board. Give them an ability to retreat this turn, get into that Comfey. Also debating that Buddy Poffin, does grab that. Looks like Psychic's basically fully setting up their board. Gonna be able to find that Chinchino, or sorry, that Chinchou, and the Shuppet is potentially the choices. Chinchou, a very interesting attacker, lets you for 1 energy do 2 damage, and then your opponent can't play any Pokemon with abilities from their hand. So no evolving into Pokemon with abilities, no basics with abilities. Considering that Colorless plays a ton of Pokemon with abilities, it's a great way to shut down your opponent, keep them from attack or setting up their board further. Things like Artisan do get around that because it does only not allow you to play those things from your hand. Artisan grabs it specifically from the deck, so our colorless player wouldn't be completely out if ultimately they do use that Chinchou this turn. Shuppet, likewise, not the Pokemon you really care about. It's that Banette that our Psychic player wants to get into eventually. Another way to be able to not only accelerate the Lost Zone, but get a supporter back from the discard. Does ultimately retreat, goes into Comfy. Flower selecting looks like Palpad and a Psychic Energy. Psychic Energy going to the discard. U-turn board going down under Comfy. Probably the best place for that. That way, if Comfy does get knocked out, the U-turn board still goes back to your hand, whereas you can continuously retreat this Comfy every single turn. One in the Lost Zone already for our Psychic player. Just 9 more before they can get to the fun number and start attacking with that Sableye. Looks like our player is just kind of clarifying a couple of things, trying to make sure that Colorless really understands what Psychic is playing. Our Psychic player, you may notice, does have pretty much all their cards in Japanese. Usually when this player comes out, he typically has references for pretty much everything that you might want to ask about. That way he can show his opponent if they're ever unsure of how something works. I'm also usually there as well, so if anybody is really unsure, they can always call me over and I can pull up a reference as well or help explain a card effect, since again they can't just directly read those cards. Colorless player does put down that Cyclizar. Looks like he's playing the free retreat version. Not the same one that everybody plays when you're playing Cyclizar, but this is a good option to gives you a nice pivot Pokemon. Artisan being used. Might see something like that Bidoof. My guess would be either Bidoof, Oranguru, or Snorlax. Does look like all 3 of those are in the deck. Seems like our player is potentially debating on that Snorlax. Snorlax, a very powerful attacker. For 3 colorless energy, you can attack for 180. It does put you to sleep, and you do have to get 2 heads to be able to wake up. But even still, there's so many ways to wake up. You've got things like therapeutic energy. You can always switch it out using something like a Tate and Lysa, or Mala and Lana, or some other type of effect that you may have. Does opt for that Oranguru. Getting some of those powerful draw support Pokemon down for our colorless player. Now, if they want to, they can start kind of resetting their hand a little bit with that Swovent, and then using Oranguru to draw back up to 3 cards. Obviously, a lot more powerful to pair with something like Bibarel, which we know our player is also running. We saw that Bidoof in there. Bibarel's Industrious Incisors lets you draw cards until you have 5. Down goes that Parallel City. When the blue side is facing you, you can only have a bench size of 3. So our player is going to have to discard 1 other Pokemon besides that Chimchou. Looks like getting rid of the Duskull and that Chimchou. Iono also going down, getting rid of some of the cards in hand for our Psychic player. Both players are going to draw back up to 6 cards, since no prizes have been taken just yet. Parallel City is one of those just really powerful cards that it's kind of hard not to justify in just about every single deck. For the cost of just putting out a stadium, limiting your opponent's Pokemon on their bench can be just such a great effect. Everybody in GLC is going to run enough Pokemon to be able to fill up their bench at some point. Since you do only have 1 copy of Pokemon and there's many powerful support Pokemon that most decks play, limiting your opponent's bench size for a turn or a couple of turns and potentially discarding a couple of them like just happened can win you games or help you get back into games that you were losing. So does put down that unidentified fossil. I believe I saw Archeops in the deck. Anybody that plays Standard knows what that card does. Evolution Incense going down, going to be able to find an evolution Pokemon. And I did see that Archeops in the deck, so does have that powerful energy accelerator. Basically, if our player is able to get that into play, he can, once per turn, find 2 special energies from the deck and attach them to one of his Pokemon. Great effect, can really power up something like that Snorlax or Kangaskhan just immediately. You don't even need those cards in your hand. Does find that Make Do, that Cincino with the Evolution Incense, can allow our player to discard 1 card and draw 2 cards once per turn. Also has a decent attack and energy assist. While not doing a ton of damage, only 40, does let you attach a basic energy from your discard to one of your benched Pokemon. So it can be kind of a good way in a pinch to set up some additional energy on one of your Pokemon. Not really attack, obviously, that you were wanting to use. Ideally, you were never actually using that attack, but again, in a pinch can be a very good attack to use to set up a little bit of damage, get another energy into play. So our colorless player does have a lot of options down, but unfortunately they don't have any great attackers. Do see that twin energy in hand, which would be a perfect target for Snorlax if they had that in play. But since they don't, looks like they're really debating where, if anywhere, they want to put this down. Seems like they're debating on that Cyclizar, does go there. Speed attack does do 100 damage for 3 energy, so it's not the worst. Definitely not the most ideal place for that, but you do need to start setting up some kind of attacker. Nest Dash, letting him shuffle their hand, putting on the bottom and drawing 1 card. Doesn't find anything useful, so a Rangaroo lets him draw 2 more. See if our colorless player has anything else they can do this turn. They have already attached, use their supporter. So not too much else they can potentially do besides set up just a little bit more, though it does look like their hand pretty much just 2 supporters and a Pokemon they cannot evolve into this turn. So we'll just kind of come down to whether or not our player wants to use this energy assist, or if they want to save that Cincino and retreat into something else. They do have Make Do, so Tate and Lisa going to the discard. Gets 2 cards, just 2 energies. Recycle Energy and the Double Turbo. Ultimately uses Energy Assist. 40 damage. There's no basic energy in the discard, so unfortunately doesn't get the effect of that attack. We're back to our Psychic player. Psychic player going to be able to get at least another card into the Lost Zone this turn. Almost certainly going to start off with that flower selecting, and there they do. Ooh, interesting choices. So that Nest Ball probably going to be what's going to the discard. That Dusclops is just too powerful. You do not want to put that in the Lost Zone. Plus, at least in the moment, without a way to bounce that Parallel City, you can't even play that Nest Ball. Bench is technically full at this point for a Psychic player. Looks like they do have a couple different options they could use this turn. Might go ahead and use Scoop Up Net on this Comfey. Is going to let that go back to hand, as well as the U-turn board. Up comes the Uxie. Wouldn't be surprised if we see the U-turn board go right back down on this and then retreat into Comfey. Since Comfey now technically is a new Pokemon, since it went back to the hand and is put back down, it can actually use the flower selecting again this turn. So it could be a way to get another card into the Lost Zone, get up to 3. Getting up to 10 as fast as possible is usually a priority for this deck. Does use Guzma, so preserving that U-turn board to put it back down on the Comfey most likely. Also sticking that Oranguru in the active to stall out their opponent a little bit. Very good play from our Psychic player. Losing another really good resource there in that Night Stretcher. So U-turn board does go back down on Comfey to give it another free retreater. Shuppet also going down, so that can at any point put 2 more cards in the Lost Zone and get a supporter back in the discard. Does retreat, goes into the Uxie, going to start spreading damage counters around. 20 damage going out to all the Pokemon. And I believe that is the, I don't think that's a horror energy. I think that's the mystery energy, if I remember what it's called, which gives you -2 retreat cost on your Pokemon. So yeah, 2 damage counters getting spread around to everything. You know, that Squovent as well as that unidentified Fosso can't last very long, even under 20 damage going out. They only have 60 HP, so a couple of just 3 attacks from this Pokemon and they'll be knocked out. I believe that is Misprit. I'm just going to call it that the rest of the game and hope that's the right one. So the Misprit is, I think, actually a fantastic addition to this deck. One of the things that I think this deck struggled with a little bit, but real quick, no, playing that Winona, going to be able to find 3 colorless Pokemon. So grabbing Snorlax, probably going to grab the middle evolution for that unidentified fossil, which would be that Urchin. Maybe Bidoof as well to start getting that set up. Though I think Bibarrel might be prized. I didn't see that in the deck when they went through just now. Anyway, get back into what I was saying as our player is selecting their Pokemon. So this Misprit, again, does kind of fix the math a little bit in many situations. there weren't a lot of great early attackers for the Psychic Spread deck to use to start setting up damage on their opponent's Pokemon, which could mean that once you did get into that Sableye or something like that Blacephalon, and once your opponent had taken some prizes, oh wow, looks like they're opting for the Aerodactyl actually. I think Kangaskhan was one of their other choices. Aerodactyl could be the attacker that they need right now. Also going to help them protect that unidentified fossil from being KO'd in just a couple of turns if they can go ahead and evolve into that. Does mean they will have to forgo that Archeops, but that is one of the challenges of something like GLC is you do only get one unidentified fossil, which means your options to get fossil Pokemon into play are limited. Does evolve into that Aerodactyl. It does have that Fossil Fangs attack now. Another attack that uses 3 energy. It's kind of a theme of a lot of the powerful attackers in colorless. While they don't have, difficult energy costs in the sense of needing lots of different types of energies, they do need 3 for most of their really powerful attackers. There are some exceptions to that, like the Kangaskhan, but that is a revenge style attack where your opponent needed to knock out one of your Pokemon to get full effect. So it does have another downside built in that way. Colorless player can still go ahead and attach an energy, but one of their problems right now is that Oranguru is just kind of stuck in the active. They did discard their Tate and Lysa last turn, which means they've got one last way to be able to retreat. Does put a double turbo on this Oranguru, which will meet the energy requirement to be able to retreat. But the question is, do they really want to at this point? I mean, what are you retreating into? Potentially just that Cincino, making it vulnerable to getting KO'd? Since they did evolve their fossil, that does give them the ability to freely discard that Archeops, since they're very unlikely to be able to ever get that into play this game. Looks like they drew a Ditto, and I'm not sure what else the other card was that they grabbed. Ditto, the most helpful Pokemon at the moment, is going ahead and retreating. It might be using Collect this turn, or I believe that's called Tearing? Can't quite read that from here, but for 1 energy you can draw 2 cards. Makes sense, at least gives them the way to go ahead and get a little bit deeper in the deck, find a few more resources. So back to our Psychic player. Not seeing a way immediately in hand to be able to retreat this turn, so they might have to opt for discarding this energy if they want to use Comfy this turn. Alternatively, they do have other ways to get their Lost Zone powered up. I believe there are 3 over there in the Lost Zone, though it's a little bit hard to see. But they've got the Shuppet, which both of those Pokemon, or the Banette, both of those do go back into play. He uses the Guzma again, so 2 more cards going into the Lost Zone. I believe that gets us up to 5. So our player did find a way to get the Comfy back in the active. Going to be able to get to 6 with this Comfy. Acrobike and Trainer's Mail are the cards that they see. Trainer's Mail is probably the better card in this situation. Gives you a little bit more options on what you're going to be able to grab with it. So it does grab that, and down it goes. Ooh, some good choices so far. Versus Seeker, Switch. Really kind of depends on how our Psychic player wants to play out these next couple of turns of what they want to grab right now. They've already played a supporter this turn, so they don't necessarily want the Versus Seeker. Looking at their hand, their only other supporter is the Iono. Probably don't want to use the Versus Seeker just yet. Might want to save that. So it does opt for the Switch. Will give them a way to be able to retreat the Misfrit next turn as well if they want to go back into this Comfy. Or shouldn't say retreat, be able to switch it out so that they can reserve their switching for their Comfy. Psychic player still has their bench limited thanks to this Parallel City. It's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Parallel City, just a great way to limit your opponent's options. While Psychic is stalling our colorless player with that Guzma by trapping a Oranguru in the active, this is still kind of at least helping to limit the setup that colorless can do because of that Parallel City. So they do have Lost Blender. Gonna let them put a couple more cards in their Lost Zone. And then draw a card. So you gotta pick a couple cards from your hand. Looks like, wow, opting for that Rescue Stretcher and the Switch. The rescue stretcher is kind of an interesting choice considering the night stretcher is already in the lost zone. That means 2 of the ways to recover their Pokemon from the discard are just gone now. They did free up 1 bench space for that Sableye thanks to putting that Shup into the lost zone. They don't quite have enough in the lost zone just yet to be able to actually use the attack yet. So going on into the Misprit and putting 20 more damage counters around. Squovent will be KO'd next turn if our colorless player doesn't have a way to be able to take it out. So I do think it's 8 in the lost zone. I think looks like our psychic player does put those on there. Very helpful since some of those are a little bit out of frame for us. Only 2 more cards to go before they can start using that Lost Mine Sableye. Since a lot of damage counters are already being spread around to their opponent's Pokemon, that thing is becoming a devastating threat. Recycle Energy does go down on the Cyclizar, so it can potentially use its attack if our colorless player has some way to get this Rango out of the active. I think they did use the Nest Dash there, so did draw 1 card, and then 2 more from that Instruct. Do still have Make Do available as well, so they could discard 1 card and draw 2. Fortunately, we've got no idea what's in their hand, so not really sure what options they potentially have this game. Colorless does need to find a way to start taking KOs. Time is not on their side here. The more damage that's going around from that Misprint and other Pokemon, the worse this situation is looking for our colorless player. So Guzma does go down, does have a way to get something back in the active. Sableye. Oh, and Lost City. So funnily enough, the payoff for the Lost Zone is about to find itself in the Lost Zone. Player does accidentally put it in the discard for a moment, but it goes right into the discard. So no Sableye will be used this game. That's going to make finishing off their opponent a lot more difficult for our psychic player. Excellent play there from our colorless player, helping to get them back in this game. You know, I was just talking about how the late game is not looking great for them. The longer they're taking to get set up and start taking KOs, the better it's looking for our psychic player. But that payoff in that Sableye is now gone from the game. Also, 2 of the ways to recover Pokemon from the discard are also gone for our psychic player. And we know their Duskull is already in the discard. That got discarded earlier because of that Parallel City. So the question becomes, how do they start taking KOs with anything besides just this Misprit? They do have Blacephalon, most likely, later in the game, but that can only do maximum effect when your opponent is on exactly 3 prizes. Looks like Iono going down. Our psychic player now needing some other options. Gonna draw 6 cards back, while only 5 for our colorless player. Well, they do find the Colress now, but not quite as helpful. They were able to get to 9, though technically their opponent helped them with that a little bit. They only got to 8. Before that, getting rid of that Lost City, down goes the Pokestop. Yeah, Colress, still a pretty decent supporter, lets you see 5 cards. But again, not... Okay, that was an easy choice. Has to put that Mewtwo into the Lost Zone, because can't get rid of that Blacephalon. It's going to be one of your few attackers you can still use. Thankfully for our colorless player, a lot of damage counters have already gone out. So if they can just get 1, maybe 2 attacks off with that Blacephalon, then they can actually still potentially come out ahead in this game. Hans Hammer getting rid of that Twin Energy. Such a great way to deal with something like colorless. It's like losing everything but a Palpad. So Training Court and Gladion both going to the discard. Looks like our player is just explaining what that does. That is an art that, I honestly don't know if that art ever came to English for that Gladion. It's not one I've ever seen. I know this Palpad is Japanese only. So Blacephalon is going down. Again, it can only do its full 12 damage counters if your opponent is on exactly 3 prizes. Does retreat back into the Misprit. Is going to take a KO this turn on the Squovent, which will help to limit the draw potential that our colorless player has. Will stop them. So yeah, there's the reference for it. As you can see, like I said before, our psychic player typically has a reference for people to be able to read whenever they're like, What is that thing that you're playing? I have no idea what that is. So it does do the 20 damage counters everywhere. Squovent getting KO'd. 1 prize taken for our Psychic player. That Cincino starting to be in a lot of danger as well. Again, that Blacephalon, while it's only activated to do its full damage potential when your opponent's on 3 prizes, it's looking like a pretty good threat now because there's so many damage counters already spread on this colorless player. Only 5 remaining for that Cyclizar, 3 for Cincino, 7 for Aerodactyl, 6 for Oranguru. Lots of choices of how you want to put those damage counters around. Our Psychic player is going to have to play very carefully in this game because, again, they have lost their Sableye, their Night Stretcher as well as their Rescue Stretcher are both in the lost zone. We know that Duskull is also in the discard. It's going to be hard to get that back. Does look like Tate and Lysa and Guzma going back to the deck thanks to that Pal Pad for our colorless player. Guzma is another one of those supporters that, you just see in every GLC deck. It's just so good. Gusting effects are already good. Having ways to not only switch out your attackers on your own side is even better. You don't have your Snorlax or something that you want to attack with in the active, so you play your Guzma. Not only can pick the choice of what you want to KO on your opponent's side, but you get your Snorlax in the active to be able to take that KO as well. It's sometimes a little bit awkward to use, but definitely more helpful more often than it's not. So our player does still need to find an energy card if they want to be able to attack this turn. Does discard that Field Blower with that Make Do. Psychic doesn't play a ton of tool cards that you need to be worried about, so that Field Blower is probably one of the few matchups where you can somewhat justify getting rid of that Field Blower. Many of the stadiums have been played as well, so there's not as many of those that you need to worry about. Does use a Quick Ball, going to be able to find another Pokemon. Good chance we'll see Snorlax finally come out to play, though Lugia could be another choice. There is that Snorlax. It's just too good of an option. Again, that 180 damage for just 3 energies, as well as Unfazed Fat. Unfazed Fat, this is one of the situations where it's actually a really helpful ability. There's many times where being protected from the effects of attacks, honestly not nearly as useful as you might think that it is. I know I'll have a lot of people come out to me and be like, oh, will this block, this type of thing or that type of thing? And it's like, 9 times out of 10, honestly, for the questions that I get asked, the answer is no, unfortunately, it doesn't block that kind of thing. This is not considered an effect, or it's not affecting the Pokemon, or et cetera, et cetera. So while Unfazed Fat is very helpful, it's not as helpful as many people think that it is, but this is the matchup where you want it. The damage counters that are being spread around are considered the effective attack. It's really the difference between doing damage versus placing damage counters. Is damage is not considered the effect of an attack, whereas placing damage counters is. So Lost Mine Sableye, which places damage counters, Blacephalon, which places damage counters, or even the Misprit, which places damage counters, none of those will work on Snorlax. It is completely immune from those Pokemon as long as that ability is active. So in Heavy Ball used, but does not find any Pokemon. Player probably knew that, but, might as well play it, get it out of the deck, so if you do get Ionoed or something like that, it doesn't go back in. Only use that it had right now was Make Do fodder, but that has already been used. So Snorlax does go down and gets that Therapeutic Energy. Therapeutic Energy completely negates that Thumping Snore's downside. Makes it so you cannot be affected by special conditions. Ultimately ends their turn by using that Touring attack, so draws 2 cards. Psychic player going to be able to, again, spread a couple damage counters around. At this point, they're very much looking like they're in control of this game, despite the fact that they do have one of their most powerful attackers in the Lost Zone now. And again, a lot of their Pokemon recovery. So Psychic is definitely not in the clear. If Colorless can start taking KOs next turn, get rid of that Blacephalon, get rid of that Misprint, there might not be too many attackers left for our Psychic player to even be able to win the game with. Does look like they are using Fog Crystal. So looking through the deck for what resources they have left is eyeing that Clara. That is one way to be able to get their Pokemon back from the discard. Lets you get up to 2 Pokemon and up to 2 energies back in the discard to choose one or both. Looks like our player is looking at all the resources that are available still for them. But for now, does need to make a choice. Actually, I'm hoping that they didn't actually play that Fog Crystal there because hopefully that was an Ultra Ball and I just missed that because you would not be able to grab that Meowscarada with that. Does ultimately grab the Hex Maniac and the Clara, thanks to that thing's ability. I'm going to guess that they probably did play an Ultra Ball that I just missed. At least typically I know this player is careful enough that I think it's unlikely that they would have just think they could grab an evolution Pokemon with Fog Crystal. Fog Crystal does only allow you to grab a basic Psychic Pokemon, not any Psychic Pokemon. But in any case, so 2 supporters go into the hand due to that evolution. So again, does have a way now to potentially recover that Duskull. Question is, do they want to do that now or do they want to save this for later? Don't believe they have played their supporter yet this turn. So they do have the option to go ahead and do that, start getting that Duskull set up so they can potentially use that very powerful Dusclops attack. Clara is going down, so grabbing, it looks like potentially just 1 Psychic Energy in the Duskull. Yeah, it's not really looking like there's any other options. Nope, does grab that Chinchino, might as well. You know, you never know when that might come in handy later, though our colorless player is basically set up at this point. Can still be good discard fodder. So Duskull does go down. For anybody that doesn't know, that can evolve into Dusknoir, which is a stage 2 that can KO itself and then spread around 13 damage. I'm sorry, it doesn't spread them around. It puts 13 damage counters on 1 target. So another 20 damage counters being spread around to the opponent's Pokemon. Again, many of them becoming very much in the danger zone for KOs. But getting back to that Dusknoir, what I was saying. So again, it KOs itself, puts 13 damage counters on 1 target. Your opponent does take a prize, but that could be a way for our player to manipulate their opponent's prizes next turn. Since right now they are on 5. If they take a KO this turn, then they will be down to 4. If they potentially have, if Psychic has something like Rare Candy to go into that Dusknoir, they could explode it, take a KO on something like that Aerodactyl if they wanted to, and then use the Blacephalon, which would now be fully online because their opponent would be at 3 prizes to potentially take out basically everything but that Snorlax. We do know they've got the Hex Maniac in hand, though 12 damage counters won't be enough to take out Snorlax. One interesting thing is that Unbase Mat is not protecting you from the effects of abilities, so something like the Dusknoir could still put damage counters on Snorlax. But it does look like a Fighting Fury Belt goes down on Cyclizar, so its HP is boosted by 40. Could definitely come into play in this matchup where every little damage counter might help, and then N goes down. Both players going to shuffle their hands back into their deck, and then draw 5 cards. Our colorless player does need to find another energy this turn so that they can take a KO. Special Charge is going to help them find a couple energies that are in their discard, can get that 20 energy back, as well as that double turbo energy. But those do go back into the deck. They do not go into the hand. I believe they do have way too many cards in their hand to be able to use something like Instruct, and I'm actually not sure if they've used Make Do this turn. The card is turned sideways, but I can't quite remember if that's just from last turn or not. If I can remember correctly, I believe it hasn't, but to be honest, I'm just not totally sure. They do have the double colorless energy in hand, so I'm going to be able to attach that to the Cyclizar, take a KO this turn. Oh, that is actually the Horror energy, so that is 2 more damage counters going back onto that Cyclizar, Wouldn't have been quite a KO without fighting Fury Belt, but extremely close. Does have 150 HP total, so right now it's got 50 HP left. Going up with that Comfy, so going to be able to do another flower selecting. But first, using that Professor's Letter, going to find just one Psychic Energy from the deck. I think there might be the last one still in the deck. This deck does not run a lot of energy. It really doesn't need very many. Mostly has ways to be able to recover energy from the discard with things like Training Court or Night Stretcher or Clara. So it doesn't need a lot. We know one went into the Lost Zone. One is attached. Now you've got the one in hand, and I believe there was already one in the discard. Debating if they want to use flower selecting. They know they don't have a lot of resources left. Ooh, tough choice. Does ultimately opt for another energy to go to the discard. Desperately needs that. Can't remember what the middle evolution is called. It's not Dusclops? I believe that's what it's called. But you do really need that Pokemon in this situation. Probably going to be your way to be able to help take out Snorlax. Or take another KO. Does find the Colress Experiment off of that Pokegear 3.0. Might be the supporter that they play this turn to find some more of the resources from their deck. Not seeing too many other options. Oh, Pokestop does get Versus Seeker, so potentially does have Hex Maniac that they can get back, which again, they're going to need that if they want to eventually take out this Snorlax. If they don't have something like the Hex Maniac available, then they could potentially get themselves in a situation where they just can't win the game. And right now, they need to be able to take 5 prizes. There are 5 total Pokemon in play for their opponent. Even if they knock out 4 and can't take out that Snorlax, if it's just protected because of that unfazed fat, then, they really don't have a way to win without decking out their opponent. So that Versus Seeker going to need to be saved for that Hex Maniac. I don't believe there's another way for them to eventually be able to win. Ooh, they are debating playing it now. They could actually take a KO this turn if they wanted to. If they did KO their own Dusclops, that would only put 5 damage counters on, but that would give them the ability to KO with that Blacephalon, because it will put their opponent down on just 3 prizes. I wonder if that's what they're thinking this turn. Does put down the Mew as well, that allows you to copy an attack that one of your Pokemon has. Psychic players got to be very careful here on how they're going to play out this turn. Does get rid of that Fighting Fury Belt. That's putting that Cyclizar in range of being able to potentially be KO'd. What they can potentially do again this turn is retreat into probably the Mew. Want to protect that Blacephalon. I believe it does also need 2 energies to be able to attack. Shuts off with the Hex Maniac. Are we going to see them blow up that Dusclops? I think, are they just copying the misprint? I believe that's what they're doing. Yeah, I think they're just copying the misprint's attack. So I'm sorry. I think that does copy stuff that's from your discard specifically. No, what? I'm actually not sure what attack they used there. Because there is one damage counter that went down on Snorlax, but I'm sorry, Hex Maniac. What am I talking about? We were literally just talking about this before. So they do take 2 KOs there. I think they did copy the Blacephalon. Did only put down 6 damage counters, which again allowed them to get 2 KOs. Put 1 damage counter on the Snorlax. The question becomes though, how do they deal with the Snorlax now? Even if they are able to get into the Death Snore next turn, that's only 13 damage counters. That will leave it with 1 HP remaining, and it does have that Luxurious Cape on. Field Blower has already been used. There's not a way to be able to power it up this turn. Or sorry, get rid of that Luxurious Cape. Tate and Lysa going to give a hand refresh for a colorless player, shuffling their existing hand in and drawing a new 5 cards. Been kind of an odd game for both of our players. Psychic lost, a lot of their really good resources and their Sable Eye, so can't ever use that. One of the big draws of the deck is that you power up your Lost Zone and then use that Lost Mine Sable Eye over and over again. Whereas in this game, it's going to be literally impossible to ever see that attack go off. No options for our abilities for our colorless player, since that is still shut off with Hex Maniac. Hex Maniac turns off all abilities for the rest of your turn when you play it, and then continues to work throughout your opponent's next turn. So town map does go down. We do see that Vibrel in the prizes. We do knew that was already there. Cypher Maniac, Hex Maniac, lots of maniacs in the prizes for our colorless player. So does lose a few more cards to the discard to be able to find this Dusclops. So going to be able to evolve this turn. So the question does become, because I missed it again, I wasn't sure if they just played Ultra Ball to be able to do to be able to get this. But if they did potentially use that Fog Crystal earlier to get that Meowskit. So that Dusknoir is now powered up, can start using its ability if the player wants to. Color's Experiment, almost completely out of cards for our Psychic player. 2 more cards, going to have to go to the Lost Zone. Yeah, might as well get rid of that Lost Vacuum, though. Then again, it is the way to get rid of the Luxurious Cape. Which, if their plan is to eventually take out this Snorlax, they are going to have to get rid of that. Does put the Palpad in the discard, which I'm a little surprised about. Again, I'm not sure how they're planning on taking out this Snorlax without getting access to that Hex Maniac again. So Judge Whistle, I think that's what that's called. Some kind of whistle. It's basically Echoing Horn. Lets you get one of your opponent's basic Pokemon from the discard and put it onto the bench. So this could actually be the way for them to get something back into play so that they can, not have to deal with the Snorlax. The question is, do they actually have the resources to win this turn? They did deck out. They got rid of the Palpad, so they don't have that to put cards back in the deck. I'm not sure they've got anything else in their hand to be able to put things back in the deck. So do they have a way to win this turn using that Dusclops? So KOing the Squovent. Player does take a prize. Both of them do. So Blacephalon is now online, retreats into it. I believe he does have the damage. Does announce the attack on the Oranguru. Seeing if he's got enough to be able to get the KO. I believe he does. So yeah, 40 goes down. That is enough. Congratulations to our Psychic player. Very well done. Completely ran out of resources while having that Lost Mine Sableye in the Lost Zone. What a great way to win. Congratulations to both players. Again, what an exciting game to see.